The Mirians were not that different from humans in many ways. They loved, they built, they dreamed, but they lived mostly underwater on their beautiful blue-green world of Miria, with webbed hands and shimmering scales that caught the light. When they emerged onto their floating cities, they had lived in peace for thousands of years, developing technologies that worked with nature rather than against it. Ambassador Q stood on the observation deck of the Central Embassy, his bluish skin reflecting the angry red glow of their dying star. Scientists had first noticed the changes 50 years ago. Unusual solar flares, radiation spikes, destabilization in the core. At first, nobody wanted to believe it. Their sun, the center of their civilization for millennia, was dying far ahead of its natural lifespan. "The projections are confirmed, Ambassador," said Hannah, the chief scientist, her voice breaking slightly as she handed him the final report. 3 planetary cycles. Then the radiation becomes unsurvivable. 6 cycles until total solar collapse. Q closed his large, dark eyes momentarily. 3 cycles, roughly equivalent to 2 Earth years. Not nearly enough time to evacuate 14 billion Mirians without help. "The Concorde must respond to our distress call today," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We've been trading partners for over 500 years. The Galactic Concorde united 23 spacefaring civilizations across their sector of the galaxy. The Mirians had been loyal members for centuries, contributing their biological sciences and underwater farming techniques to the Alliance. Now as Q activated the communication array one more time, he expected to see the familiar faces of the Concorde representatives. Instead, the screen showed only one, Counselor Dawn of the Vexari species, his grey, angular face betraying no emotion. "Ambassador Q," he said flatly, "the Concorde High Council has reached its decision regarding Miria's petition for evacuation assistance." Q felt a cold dread spreading through his body. This was not the full council. This was a messenger. "The petition is denied," continued Dawn. "Furthermore, by unanimous vote minus your own representative, the Mirian sector is now under quarantine. No ships may enter or leave." "Quarantine?" Q gasped, his translator barely keeping up with his shocked response. "On what grounds?" "We face extinction. Recent analysis of Mirian genetic structure reveals unique adaptive properties previously unknown to Concorde biological archives. The Council has determined that exposure to extreme solar radiation may trigger unpredictable evolutionary changes. Your species represents a potential stability risk." Q couldn't believe what he was hearing. "We've shared our complete biological data for centuries. This is a fabrication to avoid helping us. Resources are stretched thin across multiple systems," Dawn replied coldly. "The Council must prioritize. I'm instructed to inform you that all diplomatic channels will close after this transmission. Quarantine beacons are already in place." The King connection terminated, leaving Q staring at his own reflection in the dark screen. Behind him, the Mirian officials who had witnessed the exchange stood in stunned silence. "They're leaving us to die," whispered June, the youngest diplomat. "All of us." Q turned to face the room of frightened officials. "Get me the underground research facility. Now." 3 days later, in the secret chamber beneath the capital city's oceanic dome, Q addressed the Emergency Council. Scientists, military leaders, and cultural preservationists gathered around the circular table. Above them, through the transparent ceiling, they could see their once friendly ocean, now increasingly agitated by the solar disturbances. "The Concorde has abandoned us," Q said simply. "They claim our biology might become unstable due to radiation exposure. It's an excuse to save their resources." "We trusted them," said General Min, her normally calm voice tight with anger. "We shared everything, our technology, our medicine, our art. And now they've placed quarantine beacons around our entire system," added Director Tay from Defensive Systems. "Any ship attempting to leave will be automatically targeted by Concorde peacekeeping forces." Q nodded grimly. "Which is why we must look beyond the Concorde." He activated the holographic display at the center of the table. It showed a small blue-green planet in an unremarkable solar system, far from the established trade routes. "Our deep space monitoring detected these signals 3 cycles ago," he said, as strange sounds and primitive images flickered above the table. "They call themselves humans. Their world is Earth. They're not part of the Concord. In fact, the Concord doesn't even consider them advanced enough to contact. They look primitive, observed Cultural Minister Sue. Their technology appears to be pre-interstellar. Exactly, Q replied, which means they're not bound by Concord quarantine protocols, and they might just be desperate enough, or kind enough, to help a species they've never met. We have one. Long-range vessel that might reach them, said General Min doubtfully. But the journey would take nearly a full cycle, leaving us barely 2 cycles before disaster, and we know nothing about these humans. Ko looked around at the faces of his fellow Mirians, seeing their fear, their uncertainty, and somewhere underneath, a tiny flicker of hope. Sometimes, he said quietly, when abandoned by those we thought were friends, we must turn to strangers. Prepare the vessel. I will lead the mission myself. As he left the chamber, Q looked up once more at their angry sun. The Galactic Concord, with all its advanced civilizations and lofty principles, had turned its back on them. Now, the fate of billions rested on the shoulders of an unknown species on the edge of the galaxy. The countdown to extinction had begun. The discovery happened during the darkest hour of the Mirian crisis. Most of the science team had been reassigned to evacuation planning, but Jun kept his listening post active, scanning the distant reaches of space out of habit more than hope. "Ambassador, you need to hear this," Jun called, his voice trembling. With excitement, Q had been in meetings for 20 straight hours. Sleep was becoming a luxury no one could afford. He rubbed his tired eyes as he entered the communication center. "What am I listening to?" he asked, as Jun played the strange transmission. "It's some kind of entertainment broadcast. Music, stories, news from an uncharted system about 3 light jumps beyond Concord space. The sounds were alien yet somehow familiar. Laughter, music with simple rhythms, voices speaking with emotion. The visual component showed beings that walked on 2 legs, had no scales, and lived mostly on dry land. Humans, Jun explained, pulling up preliminary analysis. They call their planet Earth. They're not even close to developing light-speed travel, but they're advancing quickly, and most importantly, they're completely unknown to the Concord." Q felt something he hadn't felt in weeks, a tiny flicker of hope. Within days, a desperate plan formed. The Mirians had 1 ship capable of the journey, a research vessel designed for deep space exploration. It wasn't meant to carry many passengers, but it could make the journey in about 8 months, leaving just enough time to return with help before the final solar collapse. "We're not asking them to save everyone," Q explained to the Emergency Council, "just to help us build more ships or provide temporary sanctuary for some of our people. Anything is better than extinction." The Council selected 5 crew members, Q as ambassador, Jun and Ria as communications specialists, Dr. Bin as xenobiologist, and Tai as pilot and engineer. They loaded the ship with Mirian cultural archives, scientific knowledge, and a desperate plea for help. The launch was kept secret from the general population. No one wanted to create false hope. As the small ship slipped past the quarantine beacons using experimental cloaking technology, Q looked back at his homeworld one last time, wondering if he would ever see it again. The journey was grueling. The ship wasn't designed for such. Speeds and the strain on its systems grew worse each day. They rationed food, took turns sleeping in the 2 available quarters, and passed the time learning everything they could about humans from their broadcasts. "They fight so much," Ria observed one day, watching news reports of conflicts between nations. "Will they even unite to help us?" "They also show remarkable compassion," countered Dr. Bin. "Look at how they respond to natural disasters. They may argue, but they help each other when truly needed." By the time Earth appeared on their view screens, the ship was barely functioning. Their final approach was more of a controlled crash than a landing, their cloaking technology failing just as they entered Earth's atmosphere. "Brace for impact," shouted Tay, as the ship plunged toward a vast ocean. The last thing Q remembered was the rush of blue coming toward them. He awoke to bright lights and strange faces. Humans in uniform stood at a distance, weapons ready. Q was lying on some kind of examination table, separated from his crew by clear barriers. "They think we're a threat," he said weakly, his translator device thankfully still functioning. "Where are the others?" A human woman stepped forward, her expression cautious but curious. "I'm Dr. Lee. Your companions are safe. Can you tell us why you've come to Earth?" Over the next several days, a tense but respectful exchange began. The Mirians were kept in a secure facility as military and scientific teams from around the world converged. Humans were fascinated by these visitors, but deeply suspicious of their intentions. The breakthrough came when a team of linguists and computer specialists managed to access the Mirian ship's data core, recovering the archived communications with the Galactic Concorde. In a high-security conference room, world leaders watched in stunned silence as the recording played. They saw Councillor Dawn's cold face announcing the quarantine, essentially condemning billions of Mirians to death. They heard Q's desperate plea. They understood that these visitors had crossed space not as invaders, but as refugees seeking help. "They abandoned you," said President Choi of the United Korean Alliance, the first world leader brave enough to meet the aliens face to face. "Why come to us? We barely have a presence in our own solar system." Q, now recovered enough to stand, bowed his head in the human fashion he had observed. "Because you were not part of their calculation. The Concorde sees you as too primitive to matter. But in your broadcasts, we heard something they lack: passion, creativity, courage to face impossible odds." "We don't have the technology to evacuate a planet," admitted Director Han of the Global Space Initiative. "Our largest vessels can barely reach Mars." "But you have something more valuable," Q replied. "You have minds unconstrained by Concorde, thinking. You see possibilities where they see only resource equations." Slowly, cautiously, Earth began to respond. The initial fear gave way to determination. Within weeks, the Mirians were moved from their secure facility to a specially built underwater compound where they could breathe more comfortably. Scientists from every nation began studying Mirian technology. Military leaders assessed the threat the Concorde might pose. In a historic address to the United Nations, President Choi spoke words that would change human history forever. "For centuries, humanity has looked to the stars and wondered if we were alone. We now know we are not. And our first visitors have come not in conquest, but in desperate need. How we respond will define us as a species. Will we turn away as these advanced civilizations did, or will we show the galaxy what humanity truly stands for?" The vote was unanimous. Earth would help. Q watched the proceedings with tears in his eyes. His desperate gamble had worked. These strange, passionate beings with their primitive technology and their boundless determination had chosen to stand with the Mirians when the mighty Concorde had turned away. The real work was just beginning. The underwater compound built for the Mirians became a hub of unprecedented activity. Scientists, engineers, and diplomats from around the world worked day and night, trying to understand the impossible challenge before them. While government officials argued in endless meetings about resources and risks, the real breakthroughs were happening in the labs. Dr. Nari stood before a holographic display of the Mirian solar system, watching the simulated star pulse with increasing instability. As Earth's leading climate adaptation specialist, she had spent decades developing solutions for rising oceans and extreme weather. But this was different. This was an entire civilization facing extinction. "You're approaching this problem differently than expected," Q observed, his large eyes blinking slowly as he joined her. The Mirian ambassador had learned to move comfortably in the special moisturizing suit humans had developed for him on dry land. Nari tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, not looking away from the display. "How so?" The Concorde scientists calculated it was impossible to save our population. Their models showed perfect efficiency would only allow evacuation of 2.3% at most. They deemed it resource inefficient and walked away. Nari finally turned to face him. "Well, that's the difference. We're not just looking at what's efficiently possible, we're looking at what's necessary and then finding a way to make it work." This conversation sparked something neither species fully expected. A genuine exchange of ideas that went far beyond technology. The Mirians taught humans about their advanced propulsion systems, energy generation, and biotechnology. But humans taught the Mirians something equally valuable: how to think outside established parameters. In a cavernous hangar converted from a naval base, Tay and a team of Earth engineers huddled around a partially disassembled Mirian engine. The alien technology was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed, yet the Earth engineers kept suggesting modifications that the Mirians had never considered. "This shouldn't work," Tay said, examining a crude but ingenious adaptation proposed by a young engineer from Bangladesh. "But it does. How did you think of this?" The engineer shrugged. "We don't have your resources, so we learn to improvise." Meanwhile, Dr. Bin, the Mirian xenobiologist, worked closely with human medical teams, fascinated by human neural patterns. "Your brains actually work better under pressure," he explained to a group of researchers. "When faced with a crisis, your creative thinking increases. Mirian brains become more logical but less innovative. The Concord species are even more extreme. They've genetically enhanced pure logical processing at the expense of creative problem-solving." "You mean they've bred creativity out of themselves?" asked one of the human scientists, horrified. "Not intentionally," replied Bin, "but over thousands of years they've selected for predictability and efficiency. They call it evolutionary stability." These conversations were taking place throughout the compound, but not everyone welcomed this exchange. General Jin, head of the United Defense Council, watched the proceedings with growing concern. During a high-level security briefing, he pounded his fist on the table. "We're handing over our planet to beings we've known for less than 2 months. They're already learning our languages, studying our biology, teaching us to build ships with technology we barely understand. Has anyone considered this might be an invasion strategy?" The room fell silent. Jin continued, "The story about their dying star is convenient. Too convenient. What proof do we have beyond their word?" President Choi looked troubled. "Ambassador Q has shared all their astronomical data, which we can't fully verify with our telescopes," Jin interrupted. "What if the Concord quarantined them for a reason? What if evolutionary instability is a threat, not an excuse?" The debate raged for hours, eventually reaching the Mirian compound. Q was summoned to an emergency council meeting, facing hostility for the first time since the initial days after landing. The room was tense as Jin laid out his concerns, backed by military leaders from several nations. Q listened calmly, his large eyes unblinking. When Jin finished, Q spoke softly. "You are wise to be cautious, General. In your position, I would ask the same questions." He paused. "I have not been entirely forthcoming with you." The room erupted in murmurs. "President." Choi leaned forward. "What haven't you told us, Ambassador?" "The timeline," Q admitted. "We have less time than I initially implied. Our star will be completely uninhabitable in 8 Earth months, not the 1.5 years I suggested." "Why lie about this?" demanded Jin. "Because I feared you would see the situation as hopeless and turn us away," Q replied simply. "I needed time to show you what might be possible." "So you admit to deceiving us," Jin pressed. "Yes," Q's voice remained steady, "but not about our intentions or our need, only about whether you could help us in time." Dr. Nari, who had been quietly listening, stepped forward. "General Jin, I've been working closely with the Mirian scientists. If they wanted to harm us, they've had countless opportunities. Instead, they've shared technologies that will transform our world." She activated a display showing simulations of the rescue mission concepts they'd been developing. "These designs combine our approaches with their technology. What the Concord calculated as impossible, we're making possible. Not because we have better resources, but because we think differently." Jin studied the displays skeptically. "These are just theories, simulations." "True," Nari acknowledged. "But we've already built working prototypes of the hybrid engines. The Mirians didn't consider adapting their technology this way because their thinking is too linear. The Concord species are even more rigid." She turned to face the entire council. "Don't you see? That's why Q came to us instead of other advanced civilizations. Humans still know how to make the impossible possible. We haven't engineered that out of ourselves." The tension in the room slowly eased as Nari's words sank in. President Choi looked at Q thoughtfully. 8 months, she said. That's how long we have to save a world, Q nodded. Less if we are to begin evacuation before the final radiation surges. Then we have no time to waste on suspicion, Choi declared, silencing Jin's attempt to object. The deadlines for the project teams just got moved up. Let's show the galaxy what humans can do when the clock is ticking. As the council dispersed with renewed urgency, Q watched them with wonder. These beings, so far behind the Concorde in technology, possessed something far more valuable, the ability to hope against impossible odds and the determination to make that hope reality. The first signs of disaster were visible from light years away. As the human Merian fleet approached the quarantine system, the once golden star had transformed into an angry red giant, sending massive solar flares across its planets. The main view screen on Captain Bora's command ship displayed the horrifying reality. This was happening even faster than their worst predictions. "My God," whispered Bora. "How is anyone still alive down there?" Q stepped forward, his normally blue-tinted skin now pale with stress. "My people have moved mostly underwater and into cave systems, but the radiation is already poisoning the oceans. We have days, not weeks." The fleet of 12 massive arc ships dropped out of light speed at the edge of the system, immediately detecting the Concorde quarantine beacons floating in silent warning. "Ignore them," ordered Bora. "All ships activate experimental shielding and proceed to designated coordinates." The shielding technology was perhaps the most remarkable fusion of human and Merian science. Merian engineers had deemed it, theoretically, possible but practically unstable. Exactly the kind of solution humans excelled at implementing. It created overlapping fields that could deflect the worst of the solar radiation, but required constant manual adjustments that no computer could predict quickly enough. As the fleet approached the dying planet, a massive solar flare erupted, washing over the lead ship in a wave of deadly energy. "Shields holding at 63%, reported the engineer, sweat pouring down his face as he manually recalibrated the field generators. "That's well above minimum safety threshold." "It shouldn't be possible," muttered Tay, the Merian pilot. "The Concorde calculations said these shields would fail instantly." "The Concorde calculations didn't account for human stubbornness," Bora replied, with a grim smile. The sight that greeted them on the surface of Miria was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Despite being abandoned by the Galactic Concorde, the Merians had not given up. Billions had relocated to underwater habitats and deep caverns. Makeshift radiation shelters housed millions more. They had fought for survival with everything they had. When the first Ark ship landed at the primary evacuation point, the Merians didn't panic or rush the vessels. They had maintained order, even in the face of extinction. The evacuation process began immediately, with priority given to the young, the knowledge keepers, and those most affected by radiation. "We can't save them all," Dr. Bin reported grimly, after running the calculations. "Even with all 12 ships, we can evacuate perhaps 7 billion. There are 14 billion Merians." Bora refused to accept this. "Contact Earth. We need to speed up the construction of the second wave of Ark ships." "There's no time," Q said softly, "and the Concorde will have adapted to our evasion tactics by now." A young communications officer named Jun looked up from her station. "What if we don't need to move everyone right away? What if we just need to protect them until more ships arrive?" Her idea was audacious. Use the Ark ship's shielding technology, massively scaled up, to create protective zones around the largest population centers. It would drain the ship's power reserves completely, making them temporarily inoperable. But it could protect billions more until help arrived. "That's not what these ships were designed for," protested the chief engineer. "Exactly why the Concorde would never consider it," Bora replied. "Begin reconfiguration immediately." For 3 days and nights, the crews worked without rest. 5 ships were converted into massive shield generators, protecting the remaining Merian cities. The other 7 continued the evacuation, prioritizing those most vulnerable to radiation. On the 4th day, deep space sensors detected a Concorde enforcement fleet approaching. "They're earlier than expected," reported Admiral Hu from the defense vessel. "They must have tracked our departure from Earth." The Concorde fleet was massive, 30 capital ships armed with weapons Earth scientists could barely comprehend. They moved with mechanical precision into a blockade formation. "This is Commander Pax of the Galactic Concord," came the transmission. "You have violated Quarantine Zone CC-1138. Cease all evacuation activities immediately or face termination." Bora opened a channel to respond, but was surprised when another voice answered first. "This is Ambassador Sung of Earth," came the calm reply. "We acknowledge your presence, Commander Pax, but we will not comply with your order." Sung had been a diplomat for 40 years before volunteering for the mission. Her measured voice betrayed none of the fear everyone felt, facing such overwhelming firepower. "The Mirian people are under the protection of Earth now," she continued. "We have already evacuated 3 billion to our world, with another 4 billion en route. The remaining population is protected by our shield technology until additional transport arrives." There was a long pause before Commander Pax responded. "Your interference is unexpected. The Concord did not anticipate such capability from a pre-FTL civilization." "Perhaps that's why we succeeded where you failed," Sung replied. "We don't rely solely on predictive algorithms to determine what's possible." What followed was a tense standoff. The Concord vessels scanned the human ships repeatedly, clearly confused by the technology they were encountering. Finally, Commander Pax requested a direct meeting with Earth's representatives. Aboard the neutral meeting vessel, Commander Pax made an unexpected offer. "The Concord High Council has authorized me to offer Earth provisional membership status. Your technological adaptability could be useful to the Alliance." Ambassador Sung smiled slightly. "We're not interested in joining an alliance that abandons billions to die when the resource calculation becomes inconvenient." Instead, she presented an alternative, a new interstellar treaty based on mutual aid rather than resource efficiency. A system where helping others in crisis wasn't optional, but foundational. "The Mirian crisis has shown us a better way forward," she explained. "Earth and Miria are already implementing this approach. Our oceans now host Mirian settlements. Our scientists work together daily. We've begun terraform adaptation on Mars to accommodate millions more." Commander Pax seemed genuinely perplexed. "You've allocated substantial resources to save a species. You barely know with no guarantee of equivalent return." "Yes," Sung replied simply. "That's what neighbors do." The Concord fleet ultimately withdrew, unwilling to engage in conflict but uncomfortable with the precedent being set. They left with a warning that the Concord Council would need to evaluate this new development. 6 months later, as the last Mirians were safely evacuated from their dying world, the star finally collapsed in a brilliant supernova. Billions of Mirians watched from their new homes on Earth and Mars as their old world vanished in a flash of light. In time, other species began to question the Concord's policies. Some reached out directly to the Earth-Mirian alliance. A new era of galactic politics had begun, founded not on cold calculation, but on the simple human principle that had saved an entire civilization. Sometimes the true measure of advancement isn't what you can build, but who you choose to help.